Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is American Minotaur, written by yours truly, Joshua T. Calkins Truergy. Chapter 15. You know you're not fooling anybody, Katie said as Titus secured the little hasp on the back of the necklace, standing at the counter of the jewelry store in the east end of the McKinley Mall. The young waitress turned around and toyed with the emerald pendant looped onto the silver chain, admiring it momentarily. I know that this isn't for your mother. What are you talking about? Titus said, feeling slightly flustered. Your mom's birthday is in July. Right, July 8th. Quite the dutiful son, Katie quipped. Yeah, my dad's is February 20th. What's this got to do with the price of tea in China, Katie? When's my birthday? She asked, folding her hands behind her back and pivoting side to side like a mocking schoolgirl, smiling up at him. Ah, jeez, I don't remember, Kate, he said, shaking his head and flapping his hands in surrender. But again, why does that matter? It matters because this is a birthday gem necklace, and your mom's would be ruby. When's Henry's birthday? Titus once more shrugged his ignorance. Okay, what about your bio dad's? Another shrug. When's Misha's? May 7th, he immediately replied, his hands quickly clamping around his own blunted mouth. He grumbled, glowering down at Katie as she took the necklace off. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, hon. Besides, I think it's sweet that you're finally getting her something pretty for Christmas again. Last time was junior year, I think. That pewter fairy set that you got her? She'd been eyeballing that set every time we hung out here, Titus replied, indicating to the saleswoman that he wanted to go ahead and have the necklace boxed up and wrapped for the holiday. It only made sense. Right, but when was the last time you came to hang out with me without bringing her along, big guy? She's right, you know, Henry said, coming into the store behind them. With fewer classes now taking up his days, Titus had determined to spend more time with his friends leading up to and during the holiday weeks, and he had needed to make sure that this particular trip was on a day where Misha was otherwise engaged. She had one of her longer Rumble stream sessions today, so he took the chance to reach out to Henry and Katie and see if they wanted to come with him to get most of his Christmas shopping done. They had both happily agreed, and all rode together from the Jacobson home in his truck to the mall, much as they used to do during their weekends in junior and senior year when Henry had his first vehicle. We both had an idea you wanted to keep Misha's present a secret this year. Only because you know how she gets, Titus said with a flap of the hand. She gets all insistent that she doesn't need anything fancy, and then it's practically a struggle session to get her anything at all that isn't just a gag gift. Remember the one you got her a couple of years ago, Katie? Honey, that wasn't a gag, that was a lifeline, the waitress replied as they walked out of the Jared's. The girl hadn't had sex in almost a year. The least I could do was get her a nice battery-operated boyfriend to ring in the new year right. Despite his distaste for the implications, Titus found himself snickering along with Henry and Katie, and the trio made their way for the in-mall Best Buy, Henry now leading the way. What are you getting here, hen dog? Lynn's been needing a new laptop for about a half a year now. I figured I'd finally get her one that's got a little spring in its step, the outlaw mechanic replied. I don't much know what the fuck I'm doing, though. Any pointers? I'm not your guy on this score. Follow me, said Katie, hooking her arms around Henry's. I've got a pretty good idea what'll work best for her. Titus followed along, paying little attention to the actual merchandise around him. For the time being, it was just nice to be out and about with friends. With John Jacobson at his plumbing shop and Titus off somewhere with the two people who had come by the Jacobson residence around noon, Jenga should only have to worry about maneuvering around Linda Jacobson if he was to steal his way into and around the house in search of the blasting rod. However, sitting in his car halfway down the block from the Jacobson house, he had spotted one of O'Connell's eyeballs parked across the street just 2 houses down from there. He wouldn't have spotted the guy at all if not for his timely arrival. O'Connell's other employee had been further down the street, but when Titus and his friends left, and Jenga had himself started his car to move into better position, so too had the man in O'Connell's employ. This at least confirmed for the Hobgoblin that he was in the right place, that he had pegged the proper location of the blasting rod. The challenges he faced now were various. For starters, if he was spotted by O'Connell's eyeball going into the house, there would be questions raised by the Irish-American thug, questions that would effectively blow Jenga's cover. Secondly, if he managed to find a way into the Jacobson home without being spotted by the eyeball, he would have to move stealthily through the house to avoid detection by Linda Jacobson. The last stumbling block, though the one with the most grace and wiggle room to offer him, was the deadline for completing this job, before his contact back east sent another person out to retrieve the rod and its box. He had been given until Christmas Day to get the blasting rod and bring it back to Boston to its rightful owner. These eyeballs, he recognized, would have a routine shift change among their number, each man taking a set number of hours to keep an eye on the house and observe the comings and goings of everyone who lived and visited the house. The question now was, did all of these men know one another? Did they work for O'Connell on the regular? Were they locals, or Southie guys come to Buffalo and its suburbs from the region once dominated by the likes of Whitey Bulger? There was one surefire way to figure this last question out, at least. Spotting a couple of teenagers coming down the sidewalk on his side of the street, Django clambered out of his car, hands in his pockets, and a hasty plan in mind. When he first approached the kids, they seemed to hesitate, as if preparing to bolt if he made any wrong move. But a moment later, he had their rapt attention, as he held out 2 crisp $100 bills and said, "You guys want to help me make a YouTube video?" Boys the age of these kids were not easily pliable when money got involved, but rather they were much more so when the potential for internet fame came into play. They listened to his instructions, took his money, and darted off down the street as Jenga pulled out his phone and started recording. When the boys were about 20 feet past the eyeball's car, they veered slightly towards someone's front yard, assembling several snowballs. In unison, they began hucking the snowballs at the eyeball's rear windshield, only 3 of which had to land before the guy got out of his vehicle and started cussing at them, half jogging toward them and then giving full chase as the kids bolted for safety, laughing all the while. It hadn't been much of a distraction, but it had proven enough to get Jenga around the side of the Jacobson house and into their backyard, standing beside the door leading from the back mudroom attached to the kitchen. He was a full minute into trying to think through his next move when the back door opened and Linda Jacobson leaned partway out of the house, looking him dead in the eyes with a sardonic, half-lidded grin on her face. "I've been wondering when one of you boys would finally try to get into the house," she said casually. "Come on inside. There's tea." Nonplussed, Jenga followed her into the house, through the mudroom, halting as she wheeled on him and pointed down at his snow and mud-laden shoes. "Off right there. I just finished cleaning these floors half an hour ago." Jenga followed her request, feeling a little out of body at this queer turn of events, and stepped up into the Jacobson kitchen. Jenga said, rubbing the back of his mostly bald head awkwardly. Linda indicated one of the chairs at the small kitchen table, at which sat a steaming mug of tea for him. "Thanks, I guess." He came over and sat down, and took a sip of the Earl Grey. You're a new one, Linda remarked, picking up her mug with both hands. Haven't noticed you out front there yet. Jenga, out of his element, just blinked at her. Listen, I know the League has a great deal of interest in my son's potential career, and I fully expected that there would be at least one or two people coming around to try and see if they might influence his decision. Oh, he thought. She thinks I'm with the NFL. I can play into that. Then you should also be aware that there's not a lot of players in the league who are of his origins, as it were. That's why the folks in New England sent me, ma'am. Outside of the squads in Vegas and Philadelphia, no other team in the league has as many native-born or earth-born Chaldeans on their roster. I've seen your sons play, and frankly, we're impressed. Linda raised an eyebrow at him, her mouth a hard, straight line. My husband and son say you folks are in the middle of a, what do you call it? A rebuild cycle, I believe is the term. Yeah, pretty much since Brady went down to Tampa and then retired, yeah. He sipped his tea, hoping that his now relaxed demeanor would help sell this lie, a temporary cover story. And not to put too fine a point on it, but with our current state of play this season, we're going to end up pretty high up in the draft order. But if you don't think he'll declare before the deadline, or if you already know he wants to try and work directly with some other team, I won't waste any more of your time. Linda looked aside, out toward what Jenga assumed was the living room. I know he wants to stay around here, around Buffalo. You must understand, this is home for him, Mr. Carlisle, Ringard Carlisle, Jenga said, using one of his old fallback aliases. Mr. Carlisle. He's an adult now, a man full grown, and I can't keep him here forever. I'm not a fool, she said rather waspishly, looking down into her tea. Gods, I hate it when they look vulnerable, he thought. But if it is God's will that my boy ends up in New England or Los Angeles or wherever, he will be welcome. It is not my place to stand in the way of that happening. You know, she said, suddenly brightening up a little, he just went to the McKinley Mall with his friends, Henry and Katie. They shouldn't be gone that long. Would you like to wait here and talk to him when he gets back? No, ma'am. I can always come back some other time, Jenga said, pushing back from the kitchen table. I do have a favor to ask, though. What's that? Well, it'd make for a little bit of an unfair advantage for me when I do talk to your son. I won't fib you there, but would it be all right if I took a peek up in his room? Maybe get an idea about some kind of common ground I could use to try and win him over? Please? Linda folded her arms over her chest and scowled up at him, but with a kind of wry grin. Well, you did ask politely, and you're at least being honest about your intentions. Come on, follow me, she said, guiding the hobgoblin upstairs to Titus's bedroom. The moment he stepped into the doorway of the young Minotaur's bedroom, Jenga spotted it, a kind of ethereal shine coming from under the kid's bed. But he only looked at this for the briefest of moments, allowing his eyes to then pan over the various posters and displate plaques covering the walls of Titus Jacobson's room. Most of them, he noticed, were for either the Buffalo Bills or were promotional poster images for various police procedural films from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. It didn't escape his notice that there appeared to be a handful of spots on the wall that, while blank, appeared to be slightly different shade of dark blue from the other blank patches of space. He's already started taking things down, he thought. Makes sense. Kid's going to be graduating soon, and when Mama hears nest empties, it's going to be hard going on her. A mental shrug. Not my problem. Quite the hometown fan, it would appear, Jenga said with a nod. Not to be an I told you so, Mr. Carlyle, but unless your people up in Foxborough can convince him to declare, and he doesn't get picked ahead of you, I don't think my son will be wearing a Patriot's uniform in the near future. She reached over and flipped off the bedroom light, and Jenga followed her back down to the mudroom. He slipped his shoes on, and before he slipped back out around the side of the house, Linda Jacobson called out to him, "Mr. Carlyle, I don't think you'd want your competitors to see you leaving here," she said. Jenga flinched, realizing the mistake that he had almost just made. Thanking her for the heads up, he went to the back fence of the Jacobsons' property, hopped over it into the neighbor's backyard, and made his way ultimately all the way around the block back to his own vehicle. He knew where the blasting rod was for sure now. All that remained for him at this point was to figure out when he could get into the house with nobody home. From The Greatest Resource by Harlan Flois Scone. Excerpt. The following excerpt is from Chapter 10 of Flois Scone's book. Perhaps the most difficult adjustment to daily life that Chaldeans had to face in the months and years after integrating into Earth's societies was the seeming propensity of most cultures here to not have their adults go about their daily business with proper protection and armaments. Even for my own people, this seemed rather bizarre. Early on in my tenure working with the Department of Justice, I had to catch myself on several occasions from asking my colleagues where the weaponry was. For the more tribal peoples, the lizard men, goblins, and minotaurs, I cannot begin to imagine how it felt to not at least have a long knife or saber in a sheath, on the hip, at the ready to draw, and do battle with. Then again, there was also the rather glaring lack of monsters here on Earth to contend with. When some of us finally realized, often after weeks of prodding and assuming the native Humes were kidding with us, that there were no such threats out in the wilds of this world, there was some trouble adjusting, particularly for those who earned their livings back in Chaldea as either monster hunters or alchemists and potioneers. One such example, William Melkert, a half-elf monster hunter who had earned a stellar reputation in our homeworld as one of the premier men in his field, came to the DOJ looking to take on work in a law enforcement agency of some sort, any sort. All he knew, you see, was the thrill of the hunt, the chase, the capture. He reasoned that he could take that passion and handily convert it into the pursuit of criminals, and, rather naively, I agreed with his assumption. I petitioned on his behalf with the folks in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and after a brief 10-week training period, during which Melkert learned the new limits of his already limited magical abilities, as well as the operation of firearms, he became one of the first Chaldean G-men, as it were. Sadly, Melkert, as well as the rest of us Chaldeans who were working within American law enforcement fields in those early days, quickly learned that the ways of our homeworld were going to prove incredibly difficult to set aside. During his first assignment, tracking down a ring of small arms dealers in and around the city of Seattle, Melkert ambushed a street sale, wherein he shot and killed 5 members of the dealing ring, 2 undercover Seattle police officers, and 3 street gang members, who were the actual buyers. Melkert avoided criminal charges by the skin of his teeth, able only to mount a defense of his actions because of the many FBI and local law enforcement witnesses on the scene who determined that he did, in fact, identify himself first, and when he was fired upon, he returned fire, lethally and repeatedly. Where the peoples of my homelands possessed a natural power and ability that had seemingly vanished entirely from this world, if indeed it ever existed in the form of magic, the humans of Earth possessed legal frameworks and technologies that not even my own peoples could have conceived of in the history of Chaldean lands, at least insofar as I can recall learning about. The dwarves of Chaldea crafted some mechanical marvels, yes, but even those would be considered rather crude or primitive compared to what we have here on Earth. Except for indoor plumbing, thank the gods, and the dwarves of Chaldea had help on that score from the gnomes. But I digress. Melkert's story, while an early and poignant one, did not turn out to be unique among the Outworlders in the 1970s and early 1980s. It truly was not until around the middle of President Ronald Reagan's second term in office in the United States that we Outworlders seemed to finally be getting a handle on fully integrating into the broader American society. The most notable exceptions, and I do not intend to harp on them for this, since I have mentioned them in several prior chapters already for such things, were the lizardmen, minotaurs, and gotrin. Even goblins, hobgoblins, and the rarest of the green-skinned people brought here from Chaldea, the orcs, seem to have all figured out how to effectively adopt the ways of this, their new homeland. Perhaps owing to their distinctly tribal lifestyles, in combination with their lifespans, much longer than most humans, around 400 years for either race, these two races have proven in almost every nation where they reside to be broadly resistant to adopting the cultures of those nations. There is a notable exception, however: their offspring. Lizardmen and minotaurs born here on Earth, even if they live in clustered enclaves, such as those one might find in New York City, Boston, Los Angeles, or Minneapolis, have proven to have a much easier time adapting to human cultural practices and norms than have their parents. In this regard, they are almost as swift to adapt as half-elves born to one Chaldean parent and one Earth human parent.